already introduced it into our biodiversity strategy in 2021, I think that strategy came out, without a clear definition, so it means it's hard to implement. So that's the kind of area I'm going down. How you implement it, what piece of law you implement it in, I'm open to. I know NZDA have done a pretty good submission on this and have offered some solutions to it, which we'll certainly be leaning on and looking at. So that's the kind of area we're thinking about. But certainly in terms of, if you think of what's been put forward for herds of special interest, I think most people are clear in their minds about the kind of things that we wouldn't mind getting rid of completely, some of those sort of minor pest species, and the kind of things that people go out and hunt in value for recreational uses.
Like geographically, zebra in one region, zebra in another, or is it only the herds of special interest that would be valuable, or too early to say?
Yeah, it's a good point. So from the back, the question was, would you say it's split by different regions? I think certainly your herds of special interest are a geographic designation, and so the kind of management you might do on red deer in one part of the country might be different to what you do up for a heritage herd up in the Kaya or something like that. In terms of the general way you reflected value of introduced species, I think you'd probably categorise them similarly all across the country in terms of the management tools. It might just be that you then have a distinction between what you do with a herd of special interest compared to a general herd and the resources that go into maintaining one herd and another herd. But if I can think of an example, say for the Wapiti herd of special interest, I don't want to bring what the herd management plan looks like, but there is a lot of interest in thinning out or eliminating red deer population to stop them in breeding with Wapiti populations. So the herd management plan might look like maintaining a healthy population of Wapiti in Fiordland and reducing or eliminating red deer population and actually managing those populations better somewhere else. Now, I don't want to leap ahead and say that's what would happen, but it has been one of the ideas that's floating around. So you could have different geographic treatment based on different plans. I think the distinction would be removing that obligation to essentially go and eliminate everything everywhere all at once, which is not feasible to do.
As the government obviously control the paper goes through Parliament time, do you anticipate this going through Parliament in this term? I know there's an election next year and time the clock is ticking.
Yeah, so in terms of the changes to the Game Animal Council Act for being able to designate who's a special interest on national parks, that's in Parliament at the moment, so that's at Select Committee. They're generally 6-month processes, but this is a very small change, so there's an opportunity for that to be back into the Parliament within 3 to 4 months and then pass what we can get on that one. For the designation of herds of special interest itself, that's actually a process that the Minister can undertake, so the Minister and Cabinet, so it doesn't rely on passing law in Parliament. So as long as we go through the proper consultation and we have the herd management plan drafted up in a way which reflects the various statutory requirements, I'm hopeful we can get drafts or publicly notify drafts sort of towards the latter half of this year, and all going well and they all meet the requirements that I'm legally obliged to sign off, then we could have those in place sort of early next year. The one thing I'm very cautious about is for the first couple, because I'm aware there are other herds of special interest around the country that might want to have for whitetail down on the Shore Island, heritage red deer up in the fire, tar as well. We want to get the first ones done really, really well, because the last thing we want is to be tied up in litigation for years and years and years, people challenging whether or not I've made the right decision in a legally robust way. So if we can spend a bit of extra time and energy getting the first ones set up really robustly and setting up a platform and a framework for subsequent herds of special interest, I think that's probably going to be better than mine. Just on your legislative thing though, and Nicole might be able to comment on this later on, but I sit on the Legislative Cabinet Committee which considers all of the pieces of legislation that comes through. The government is doing a lot, and there's only so many slots in the legislative timetable, and the only way to speed that up is to use urgency or extended hours, and there are political ramifications for overusing that. The public gets a bit dicey when you see pushing for a lot of stuff. So it is a real juggling piece that the ministers have to do in terms of what can get done on the timetable. And myself and Nicole, we talk with officials and we advocate for getting our bits of legislation up as high a priority as we can. But there's a lot on the timetable and there's only a few slots available. So one of the things to think about is when you're making submissions on legislation, that have scope to expand other changes is when you make your submissions, if there's scope to suggest other kinds of changes to the legislation that would be helpful to meet the overall purpose of it, do that, because that means we can use the existing bill which is in the process to make those other changes rather than having to rely on having to get it into another slot. It's a complicated sort of parliamentary thing, but the end, I guess, story is the government's doing a lot, there's not enough space on the timetable to do it, so we have to prioritise. If we get an opportunity to change things in one piece of legislation, let's try and do as much as we can.
James Roy Sloan, Botany Foundation. You kind of answered my question. What I'm going to say to you is that this amendment bill going through Parliament, do you think it's got the beef to stop us having another judicial review like we're having over here at the moment? And two, if we do submit some proposed changes to this, will we have time to get those through and hosies through by next election?
Yeah, thanks for working with you guys do undervalued work, I think, given some of the comments made over the past couple of months when that bill went through. So, yes, I think there's enough time to do both at once. So the purpose of the bill going through at the moment is to clarify beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Minister can designate a herd of special interest in national parks. Now there's some legislative uncertainty as to whether or not that's the case, and I don't want to comment too much on ongoing court proceedings, but the idea behind that bill is to give certainty so that when these things come up for consideration, it is clear that the question of whether or not it can happen in a national park is determined definitively by the Parliament, and that's the idea of that bill. Now, in terms of being able to get everything across the line, in the next 6, 12, 18 months, that's a matter of the Parliament going through its process for the legislative change, and I'm confident that there's sufficient time for that. In terms of designating the HOSI itself, we've got to meet our consultation and statutory requirements, but a lot of that falls on me as the Minister to respond and put my time and attention into that project. And I can tell you that it's my number one priority in terms of the hunting and fishing portfolio, is to make sure that we see as far as possible designation of those herds of special interest within the legal bounds that I'm able to do so. So if you've got confidence in me and putting the attention on that process, then I think we have done.
One suggestion, James, is my wife keeps telling me that I spend too much time out bloody hunting and I don't get the work done around home. Perhaps you shouldn't be doing so much hunting.
Well, it's you can blame the chair of the Tarn Foundation for that. They dragged me up a mountain in Mesopotamia about a month ago and exhausted me. But I did shoot my very first tar up in South Canterbury a couple of months ago, and I left the bulls for you when you got off the site, so don't worry about that. One thing you need to do, Roy, is maybe you need to one day become the Minister of Hunting and Fishing and then get a job to go hunting.
Yeah, hi James, Grant Dodson, Game Council. I appreciate that it's not on the parliamentary agenda for this term, but I just wanted to understand any future direction around wider changes to conservation legislation, just noting that things like the Wild Animal Control Act are getting pretty dated now, as in 1977.
Yeah, so Tama Portaka has a wider reform program in conservation, and you've seen that with some of the consultation coming up about access and about various ways that concessions can be sped up and treated in the conservation land. You're right, the Wild Animal Control Act, the Conservation Act itself, a number of those bits of legislation are quite dated and they need to be reformed. So there's a wider piece of conservation reform. Within that though, the benefit of having a Minister for Hunting and Fishing is I have specific responsibilities and delegations for parts of the conservation framework that relate to hunting. Right, so I can flag this with my officials now. I will be raising with them in the next couple of weeks the idea of within that wider conservation reform, if there are some bits that we can take control of in terms of providing some consistency around how does the Wild Animal Control Act interact with the Game Animal Council, Fishing Game Act, Conservation Act, National Parks Act from a hunting perspective and a game animal management perspective. And so while it might not make it into the legislative time frame this year, it could be one of those things that we campaign strongly on, and it could be one of those things we can get across the line for introduction course, the likes of the Game Animal Council will lean on quite heavily for your expertise and influence in the area. You too. Hey, just before we wrap up, once again, just want to acknowledge everyone for being here today. It's Saturday. You probably all got kids' footy or stuff that you're missing to be here. So really appreciate you spending the time. Really appreciate your dedication to hunting and to the sector. And I just want to reiterate that me and my office are always open to any branch to extend an invitation for me to come and visit. I had a good time talking to the guys up in Kapiti a couple of weeks ago, and they raised some specific local issues that were brought to my attention that we could go and work on. So anytime you feel like raising an issue with me, bring it through Cullum or directly to my office, and we're more than happy to work on whatever issue that it is that you have. So once again, thank you for your time today. I look forward to catching up over lunch.